Hello, dear UPSC aspirants, students who've just decided to start their UPSC journey and are quite confused about what are these different subjects that are there, how to go about these different subjects, can I do self-study and get started on these different subjects, etc. Those who have all of those doubts, I'll be trying to clarify those doubts from the perspective of the subject of environment. Okay, so we are going to deal with why you have to study environment in the first place, how you can study environment, and what exactly is the trend of environment that is happening in the recent years. Now, to begin with, one of the first things that I have to tell you is a lot of students do think, there is this conflict that happens where I'm not from science background, so subjects like environment, science and tech, etc., can I skip it? Now, this is where I'm going to make my case in front of you. Right now, with the changing pattern of UPSC, when I'm saying changing pattern, what I mean is the very fact that nowadays the questions from your static areas like polity, economy, etc. come in a very, in a very spurious manner. Spurious manner means, for example, for the same question, you will see that a lot of institutes give 2-3 different answers. How is it that is possible? It's possible because these things can be interpreted in different manners. And this is where subjects like environment and science and tech remain different. Why? Because the root of these subjects are mostly fact-based or science-based. So what happens is you will more or less have a single answer for this area. So subjects like environment, from the very aspect of the exam, give you that idea where, okay, yeah, what I've written for the test or what I've written for the exam is what is going to be my answer for it, or what is going to be the answer given across the different answer keys. And you can be relieved when you have other 10-12 questions with different answers. So from the point of view of a subject and from the point of view of an exam, this is a highly rewarding subject. Now, that being said, you also have to understand that the weightage of environment as a subject over the last few years come between 10 to 15 UPSC questions in prelims. Now, when I'm saying 10 to 15 UPSC questions, the most recurrent number of questions is somewhere around 13 questions. And these questions, what happens is this is something that has increased over the time because UPSC prelims is the same prelims for your IFOS, your Forest Services exam also, and you have to be exposed to environment related aspects. This is the reason why the number of questions of environment have increased and also the nature of environment questions have changed. Earlier, environment purely used to come from a current affair perspective. So, a lot of students would just mug up the current affairs that are over there and try to go and write the exam and they would pass. This is where the nature of environment questions have become different. Nowadays, what they are looking are a more general nature or general kind of questions. When I'm saying general kind of questions, I'll tell you an example. These are the kind of questions, maybe like last year, there was a question where you had honeybees as the answer. A lot of my students ended up writing that answer not because it was something that they had read somewhere or anything, but because of the fact that you observe that feature about honeybees, how they go from flower to flower, create a network between them, etc. So, these questions have a very quiz-like nature, something that you would have seen in school, etc. Therefore, I can say environment questions have a very general nature right now. And despite it being very general nature, what you can do is you still have the scope of studying certain things. You still have the scope of tackling few questions based on your static portions. So it's a fine balance. It's a subject that has a very fine balance between general questions and specific questions. And if you choose to do either of these also, you will be rewarded. So again, second point. And finally, this is when I start environment classes in my in the institute. One thing that I ask students is why are we learning? Why do we have so many classes for environment? And every year, if you notice, the classes for environment increase also. Why is it that? It's because your UPSC exam is it's like a mirror into the government's policies. Whatever the government considers as important, whatever the government considers as its priority is what gets reflected in your UPSC papers. Because that is what you are trying to get inducted into, that service which considers you to be, or which expects you to be part of the policy. So think for a moment. Where do you hear India's name in the last few years? When you take any newspaper, if you've not even been a UPSC aspirant, you constantly hear India's name in what all spheres. You hear India's name in space, you hear India's name in international relations, and you hear India's name in several environmental organizations. Climate change related, pollution related, cities related, urban planning related. In all of these cases, you do see India spearheading, India taking the lead to direct and to take over, the leadership of several G20 countries, several developing countries, etc. when it comes to these fields. Now you think for a moment, what is the one trend that all the UPSC experts have been saying all this while? In the last few years, IR has made a huge impact in your prelims paper. Why is it that? That's because of this policy mirroring. So from that perspective, one subject that you can be very sure that if you study it in a proper manner, that you will be rewarded in a good amount is your environment. Now, keeping that as a point, if you have to study it very well, where do you start from? You ideally have to start from the syllabus. And unfortunately, the UPSC has not given a very elaborate syllabus on environment. From the very, prelims perspective, they've just mentioned general issues on environment, ecology, biodiversity, and climate change. And this is almost all the issues that we are currently knowing. Then you have something from your main syllabus which says conservation, environmental pollution and degradation, environmental impact assessment. Out of all this environmental impact assessment is a area that comes purely from a mains perspective. All the others, you do see questions even coming for your prelims. And that is an end there. When it comes to environment, UPSC in the recent years have also put essay questions that have an impact or that are related to environment, that you can write an entire essay based on that topic which is there. So now last year we had about trees which are there, or forests which are there. That's a purely environment topic that can, or that from where you can write an entire essay. So how do we deal this subject then? How do we get started and how do we study this subject then? To study this subject, I basically divide environment into two parts. There is a static part and there is a current affair part. Let's first start with the static part. Static part primarily deals with certain ideas of what is environment, what are the different mechanisms that are there in environment, what are the different species that are there in environment, how are we trying to protect the environment, etc. So things that have been there in the world for the last 25 to 30 years comprise what is the static part of your environment. To study the static part of your environment, you can already get started on your own also. Why? Because you have these chapters which I have mentioned over here. Your NCERT class 10th science chapter 13, which is our environment. Class 11th biology unit 1, which is diversity in the living world. Class 12th biology unit 10, which is ecology. NCERT 11th class geography natural vegetation. all of these chapters which are listed, you can probably take a screenshot of this or something, or you can jot it down right away. You can start reading environment from this. Now, this I call as the first foundation. Once you're dealt with this first foundation, the next thing you can start to look into is, there is a textbook of environmental education by your ICSE board. Textbook of class 9th and class 10th can be read in utter detail, and it's a little bit more complex than your NCERT books. Okay, so this comprises your second base. Once your first base and second base is done, you would have certain terms in your head. Like, for example, you would have ideas like wildlife sanctuary, national parks, etc. It is then where your third foundation, which is your ENVIS site. ENVIS is the Environmental Ministry site, website of the Indian government, and on any given day, the information that you learn has to be corroborated or has to be correct with respect to this site, which means it's always better you start looking at that site and learning itself. So if your first base and your second base is done, the third thing that you have to look into and get details about is from your environmental ministry. So you have the complete list of all the national parks, any details, any species related details, all of these things. Once you go through that website in detail itself, you will know that, okay, yeah, what UPSC considers as important, because again, it's a ministry website. This is what you can do for your static part as a foundation. Thereafter, obviously, you might join for a class or something. So if you're joining at IAS Baba, you have something that we have combined different sources that are there, and we've created something called as a value added note, a VAN. That is something that normally students do for reference, along with obviously my classes also. I do teach environment, and my class notes is something that I consider as something that you can go back and revise, and you just have to have value addition to those notes. So this is what happens in your static part. Now coming to your current affair part, current affair is where if you are not planning to join for any class or anything, your current affairs is going to be all over the place. So let's start off like this. Current affair preparation obviously starts from your newspaper. But then when it comes to a subject like environment, it's not just enough that you just look at one Hindu. So you might have to look at Hindu and Indian Express to get a quite lump sum of current affairs that are good, And when you look at these current affairs itself, always make notes of it. I cannot stress how important note making is when it comes to current affairs of environment and science and tech. Please make the notes, okay? So because in one newspaper you might hardly get one current affair or two current affairs of environment. So when you combine two papers in total on a daily basis, you might get maybe 4 news related to the environment. It's not difficult making the notes of it. Make it. Now those who are working and cannot do newspaper on a daily basis, then you will have to rely on any current affair PDFs that are there. But again, I am not a fan of current affair PDFs, but if you have to, then you have to do it in a detailed manner. Apart from all of this, students do ask me, what can I do to have all this general knowledge which is there? Now, as funny as it may sound, I have found something like over the time when you are looking at species. For example, if a new frog species has been discovered in the Western Ghats, in the recent times, never has UPSC asked a question on that species. But UPSC always tends to ask a question about that species, which is frog. So I've made it a habit that over the time, whenever any species does come, a bat. For example, this year there was the question on fruit bats, which is the Indian flying fox. That's something that's recurrently there. So what you can do is whenever a species comes like that, rather than just learning, okay, which national park it is in, which wildlife sanctuary it is in, go and understand that species. Okay, now it gets funny over here, but I want you to be very serious. You have to go, and I tell to my students, you have to know what it eats, how it mates, how much time, or is there any weird peculiarity in the young ones it creates? Is it a nocturnal animal or a diurnal animal? Is it a vegetarian or a non-vegetarian? Is it something that can exhibit any exceptional features at time? This is the way you can prepare yourself for in 1 year span for this subject. Okay, I hope from a fresher's perspective, this has been at least a little bit of light in getting to know this subject. This is not something that anywhere under the sun anything can be asked. That's absolutely not the way environment questions are designed. It's not like that. And I would again urge you that deal with static part and deal with current affair part of environment on a separate basis. Just because you did current affair, your environment subject is not complete. I hope I've been able to give you some guidance with respect to the environment subject. I hope to meet you all again. And again, when you have any queries regarding this thing that we have discussed over here, put it in the comments. I'll make sure to deal it with in one of the coming videos or so. Until then, take care and happy learning.